I know there's a lot of people like Jeremy Corbyn who's launched this new party, which I urge as many of you as possible to join. Yourparty.uk, you can join today. It's now the biggest political party in Britain. In fact, the biggest, once it forms, the biggest political party in the whole of Europe. So it's bigger than twice the size of Reform. Twice the size of Reform. So out of the blue, suddenly this huge force or potential force has emerged. But they argue, Jeremy Corbyn argued, and I joined his campaign at the very beginning when he stood in 2015. And he argues this type of argument. The rich people are taking the wealth, they're not giving it to the poor. If only we transferred some of the wealth from them to the poor, then the thing would be a lot better, or could be resolved. I understand why this looks to be logical, but actually it's not correct. Even though you could transfer money from the billionaires, you could give it to the poor, that's not the cause of the crisis we live in. When the profit rate is high, let's say you're making a huge profit out of coffee at Speaker's Corner, there will be dozens of coffee shops at Speaker's Corner. If you're making a huge profit out of quality shops on Oxford Street and in central London, you will have loads of quality shops in central London and in Oxford Street. But if you walk down Oxford Street and you go through central London, you will see loads and loads of shops selling sweets and vapes and luggage. How much luggage, sweet and vapes can you make? There are none of these shops that are making money. They are money laundering operation for the drugs trade. Money is being laundered through these shops that you see. One guy sitting in there with loads of souvenirs, vapes and luggage. How can Oxford Street have that much demand for luggage or for American sweets? It does not exist. If the capitalism is driven by the profit rate, if the profit rate is high, the investment is high. If the profit rate is low, the investment is low. That is a structural problem of the system. It cannot be resolved by taxation policy. It cannot be resolved by redistribution policy. It can only be resolved by expropriation of the largest companies to drive investment to serve the needs of the people rather than the profit of the private corporations. 3 minutes, yeah? Timing.
3 minutes, yes. But the argument is that this is just the way the world has been. This is just the way the world has been. And this type of argument is actually not very helpful because it makes us powerless. It makes us think, well, aristocrats have always had power. Aristocrats have always wanted to influence politics and policies. So there's nothing new here. But there is something new here. We really do need to pay attention to the very people who are on top, especially the uber wealthy who are running the technology. This type of technology that we are presenting at the moment is absolutely manipulating not only the governments but our minds. They are manipulating the way that we feel about our world, and therefore it is different. People like Elon Musk are a threat to civilization, to the humanity. They are actually introducing technology, artificial intelligence, without really knowing, and they've said this openly, without knowing what the effects of it will be on the civilization, on humanity. The issues that we haven't in the past faced issues like nuclear threat. We haven't faced issues like climate change. Democracy is at a very different juncture. In the past, we could, as people, decide that if we didn't like our politicians, we can vote them out. Now we are at a juncture. First of all, a lot of people are being manipulated by the way technology works out. And second of all, the threats are existential. We haven't had these threats before. And therefore, we need to pay attention not to immigration, not to cultural wars. We need to pay attention to the monopoly of power in politics and how money is driving vested interests. So that in that sense, the argument that this is something that's happened in history is actually a dangerous argument because it distracts us from the fact that the financialization of economy, cryptocurrency, stable coins, all these things are unproductive primitive form of economy that they don't add anything to society and to productive economy, and basically are hollowing out the society, creating this harmony among people. And that is why that we are seeing genocide happening in Palestine and feeling hopeless about what we can do, because that's the way the system is being manipulated, and that's the way that we are being taught to think that there is nothing we can do. This is the way things are, and all we can do is just to sit at a distance and watch. But no, we can actually create a consciousness. This consciousness is extremely important. Our consciousness and our focus should be towards the uber billionaire. I'm not talking about wealthy people having money or having ownership. It's not about communism. This is just like accusation of anti-Semitism when you come to support Palestinians. It's just an accusation to shut down the argument. As soon as you come and talk about those uber rich, they say to you, communist and Marxist. Yes, I support Palestinians.
As I say, this is the type of argument put forward by a lot of left-wing activists, including Jeremy Corbyn and his team. So it's quite a viable, and that's why I'm happy to discuss. But factually, this is inaccurate. The First World War was a war between the major powers for control of the world. Millions and millions of people were slaughtered in that war. And that war was what you could call the first imperialist war. What is imperialism? Exactly what the lady described, the connection between financial power and economic power, and the merging together of the two so that they became indistinguishable. And do you think that the mobilization of people for war in the First World War was any different? They said, oh look, the enemy is the Germans. The Germans said, oh look, the enemies is the Brits. Where in the meantime, the Brits and the Germans were fighting for control of Africa, fighting for control of the world. And they used all the devices of power, the weapons, the machinery, the armaments, the chemicals, were all developed for the use of slaughtering millions of people around the world to subdivide the world and conquer the world. And then came the Second World War. What do you think that was about? The Second World War, we are told nowadays, was about the Nazis in Germany. Adolf Hitler, out of the blue, out of nowhere. He was financed by the American corporations. He was financed by the big businesses. He was supported by the then King of England. There were large-scale global corporations who were determined to use Adolf Hitler to destroy the Soviet Union in order to gain control over the Soviet Union, the territory of the Soviet Union, the oil resources, the gas resources, the material and human resources to control the world. The same crisis after the Second World War. You don't think there was propaganda used? I remember I lived in East Germany. I've lived in China. They said those countries are totalitarian dictatorships and that we have to fight war and overthrow government in Chile, in Nicaragua. We have to destroy the Palestinian resistance, at that time led by the PLO, a so-called terrorist liberation movement. All the way through my childhood, the PLO was fighting for liberation. The difference is this: at that time, the Arab nationalists stood up against Israel and stood up against America. Liberation rebellions, the African National Congress, don't forget, in South Africa, they were described in England as terrorists. That's what they said. The white man of South Africa is defending freedom and democracy against the African hordes who will take over and establish a communist dictatorship in South Africa. These arguments were the arguments of the day. You said nuclear war. I remember they used to have on television when I was a child. Every couple of weeks they would have this counter. They would say, oh, look, we're 2 minutes to midnight, on the edge of nuclear war. When the Russians went into Afghanistan at the invitation of Najibullah in 1979, the West said, we are preparing for nuclear war against the Soviets. There is nothing spectacularly new about Elon Musk, nothing spectacularly new about AI, except this: we can use AI to assist people on a grassroots level. to mobilise. I was an activist in the 1980s. We used to try and get people, train them to write a leaflet, train them to produce a leaflet, train them to organise people, train them to disseminate. Now you do not even need to be able to write properly to be able to get the AI to produce a leaflet, to campaign on your housing issues, on your healthcare issues, on your social issues. So it's not just a one-sided tool. You can also use the technology to facilitate the strengthening of the power of the workers. And by the way, the reason why Israel is in trouble now, despite its military superiority, despite its barbarity against the Palestinian people, is precisely because every child in the world has seen what's going on in Gaza, and they're outraged by it.
So whether it's the economy that rules the politics or politics that rules the economy, at the end of the day, like if every rich person and every politician was here right now, and they were told to do whatever it is you tell them, what exactly would you tell them to do to change the situation?
I wouldn't, because that's a misunderstanding of how the system functions. You can take Elon Musk, you can take Bill Gates, you can take Klaus Schwab, you can take Keir Starmer and the biggest billionaires in the world, put them all in a room, blow them all up, and within 3 months the system will repeat itself. Because it is endemic to the structure of society. The system of society is geared to the production of this particular order of power. It's rooted in the economic power, not in political power. Politicians are representative of capitalism. They represent the order of society as it exists. If you kill them all, they will reproduce until you uproot the system itself, which starts in the economy. It means instead of worrying about who is in Parliament, although that's important, instead of worrying about that, Parliament is only important to the degree that enables people to take power over their lives in their communities. You can remove that head, that person, that person, that person, and the multi-headed hydra will reappear again. Because that's what it is. You can slice off one, slice off the other, slice off the other, it will reappear and reassert its control until you uproot the system. And the system is the dominance of the banks, the big corporations, over politics and society, not the individual. This is not about Elon Musk. It's not about the individuals in charge of it. It's about who exercises power in society. The people who produce the wealth, the people who make the wealth, the people who work, or the people who own and control the means of producing wealth. And if you had a revolution that took away their power, you could give them all £1 billion and say, go and live on an island, and they wouldn't be able to do anything. And that's what, in fact, what is revealed in Russia and what is revealed in China is you can have billionaires, but they've got no power. They've got zero power. Zero power. Jack Ma in China, one of the richest men in the world, zero power. So that's the point.
I think it's good to hear your arguments. I think, you've really thought about it. I don't know when you started speaking here, but I feel like I've been listening. So I've been listening to you for probably about 25 years, and I think you make a lot of sense. I sympathise with a lot of what you're saying, but I think for me, every time I hear you speak, it comes back to the question of under your proposed alternative, where does the control lie, and why do you have so much faith that it would result in anything different? Because to me, when I've not as detailed as you, but when I've studied Marxism and communism, it comes down to a certain point where, again, people are in control, and I personally don't see examples in history or examples in my personal experience of humanity that suggests that system would be fundamentally different, partly because power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely.
How power is exercised under a new society will be determined by how power is exercised now. So you have to transform what exists into something else. We're not transforming the Soviet Union into a democratic state. That has passed. You could transform China into a democratic administration by the people, in my opinion. Go on to AI, not only the English one or the British ones, but the Chinese ones and other ones. Go on to there and look up. How could an administration based on the concept of workers' control and management, administer the community and economy today. You would be able to exercise power locally over the resources locally by democratic institutions with its own financial system, connected together across the nation and across the world, where secrecy applies and privacy applies, and where the people exercise control over all different aspects of society. It is perfectly technically possible to design systems like that within a few days of making a revolutionary change in society. Within a few days. And in fact, one of the arguments I'm making as to why people should join the new party launched by Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn is precisely because of that. Not because I think Jeremy Corbyn is some saviour or Zara Sultana is some saviour, but because the fact that 700,000 people have created a party out of nothing in 1.5 weeks tells you that there is a latent potential for genuine mass involvement in democratic control and administration over society, over the councils, over local government, over the workplaces, over your rights, over your conditions, over the police, over the judiciary. And you can use AI as a mechanism to facilitate your exercise of control, the expansion of your control, the expansion of your power, and you check it. Doesn't mean you rely upon it. You use it as an instrument to put forward methods of dealing with the bureaucracy and with capitalism, and then you mobilize people around the demands that you've checked that they're viable. Then you take action based on those criteria. So the combination of man and machine can allow you to replace the Elon Musks of the world. You know, Elon Musk, he looked so clever before he got into power. When he got into power, he started looking like an idiot. And he was wandering around on ketamine, going like that, not knowing what he's doing. Suddenly, as soon as the focus was on him, suddenly he looked like an idiot, right? So actually the reason for that is because no individual can or should be able to exercise that amount of control over vast resources in society. That's true. That's where the argument against the billionaires comes true. But it doesn't matter. You could eradicate billionaires. You could make a law that says you can't earn more than £10 million, and still the system would function the way it does. It's not based upon billionaires, it's based upon the structure of authority and power. The same power that if you go to that cafe, it's exercised over the staff. If you go to McDonald's, if you go to the police, if you go to the judiciary, there are hierarchies of power corresponding to the accumulation of capital by the capitalists themselves based on the rate of profit. High rate of profit, investment. Low rate of profit, no investment. That's what drives the dynamics of the system. It's not about the personal will of individuals. It's a systemic question, rooted in the very way our lives are structured. Our lives are organised by capitalism, which means by money, so our interrelationships are governed by money. Our actions are governed by money. Tomorrow morning, half of you will be going to work governed by money, instead of being controlled by this alien force, which we ourselves make. We must take control of the resources that we produce and administer themselves in conjunction with controlling the machinery of power itself, which means AI today. It means we must control AI, not AI control us.
Thank you, that's helpful. Is it fair to say, might be an oversimplification, but you're talking about deregulation of authority, deregulation of economic structures?
Well, it means creating an alternative structure of power from below to take control over the resources in society.
Based on economic.
Identifying how power is actually exercised and taking control over them. But that means that the starting point is in a community. That's why I'm supporting the new party, mobilising people to fight for their basic rights as they confront it now. And when they do that, then they can expand that to wider questions. Yes, of course, yes, of course.
Yes.
Revolution, yes,
So we
revolution. But revolution is an empty phrase unless you clarify what you mean by it. And that's why I don't like shouting, down with the billionaires, long live revolution, because it's an empty phrase. we can actually mobilise people at a grassroots level and let them say revolution without me shouting revolution, revolution, revolution.
I agree capitalism is a force for revolution. So I think whether we like it or not, that revolution is going to happen. What I disagree with you is the fact that is the denial of the challenges that we face because of artificial intelligence. Well, you said it's the same as before. We've always had this, but I'm saying that I'm saying that actually artificial intelligence and technology and nuclear are challenges
Nuclear is
that
nothing
make
new.
it very difficult.
Nuclear is nothing new.
Artificial and technology
Since the 1940s, since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we've had nuclear, right? So you're saying artificial intelligence. True, artificial intelligence is new. Yes, but it's a double-edged sword, more than a double-edged sword. I believe
because they control the power.
Come on, let me answer. I believe artificial intelligence can be used by the people to take control. Well, that's up to you to say that. If you're just saying negative, 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 then there's going to be no revolution anyway, is there? If there is so much power and you can't do anything, what are you going to do? They control what?
They control the technology, and therefore they're not going to let
Look,
people.
they've always. That's where we disagree. They've always controlled. They've always had the guns. They've always had the weapons. They've always had the media. We have more power over media today. You're streaming something right now, right? You've got more power over media now than you had in the 1960s when it was a one-way television and one-way cinema telling you the truth, and you had no alternative to that. You only had one message. So I believe you've got a chance to counter that today. And the fact is, at certain points, even though they algorithm you out, they block you, they close you off and so on, you have the chance to turn that around. And there are ways to do this, to make this video, for example. You could make this video go to millions of people, provided you had a network of a couple of 100,000 people who would work together on that. It could go to around the whole planet. You know, that's how Tommy and his brigade get their message out, because they got a network that does that. Our network is weak at the moment, and that's where the flaw lies, and that's the weakness that we can overcome if we've got this new party that mobilises. So that's the reason why I say to people here and online, join this new party, yourparty.uk, get involved and get active in your community, and come to Speaker's Corner, join up with us and collaborate with us, because we have a world to win.